Have you ever spent 45 minutes or longer working on a treatment plan for a patient only to have them nod along and agree with everything you're telling them while you're sitting in front of them and have them say at the end, "This all sounds great, but I'm going to wait and make an appointment after I talk it over or think on it a little bit." You may have chalked it up to either they were price shopping or they got cold feet. Am I right? But here's the uncomfortable question to sit with for a minute. If your plan was great, then why didn't they just book right then and there? If this has happened to you and this sounds all too familiar, you're not going to want to miss today's episode because this is exactly what we're going to dive into. And you're going to get some action steps on how to make progress, make changes, and get those people booked without feeling like a car salesman. If we haven't met yet, I'm Alisa Conner, and I work specifically with specialty medical practices and professional services organizations to help them grow, not by outspending their competitors, but instead by creating customer and patient experiences that your patients and customers can't wait to talk about. So let's dive into this week's episode. So specialty consults are specifically susceptible to ghosting of appointments. And there's a few reasons why. And the first one is that the things you're asking the patient to do are frankly scary. And they may not be in the right mindset or headspace to make those decisions. If you're asking them to have surgery or prescribing a new protocol treatment that is lengthy or invasive, they may just frankly say, no, I'm good. I'm just going to wait it out. And that's human nature. Like humans don't want to experience pain, even if at the end of pain, it will be a positive result. So that can be the first challenge right there is overcoming that resistance to even wanting to get treatment or have surgery. The second and I see this a lot, especially in medical practices, but also in professional service organizations, is that both sectors have and love their jargon. And what that means is that you like to talk in the words that your medical cohorts also understand. The unfortunate part about this is that most patients don't have a medical degree. And so when you're using very clinical terms with them, they may nod along and smile and think it's all great, but not understand a word you have said. And that only exacerbates the problem of having anxiety and not wanting to move forward with the procedure because it hasn't been explained to them in words that they understand or in a way that they feel comfortable. The third problem that arises when it comes to patients ghosting is financial fatigue or fog. A lot of times there can be extraneous expenses that go along with specialty treatment. And more often than not, unfortunately, the financial implications of those procedures are not clear enough to the patient for them to make a quick decision. If it hasn't been spelled out for them exactly, it will cost this much. Typically, the insurance covers this much. It's going to be this much extra, and you can plan on this many visits. They're more than likely going to step away until they have more clarity around the financial implications for them, their family, time off of work, all of those different factors that feed into financials. The fourth challenge that can come up is we like to call it the spouse approval or significant other approval. So you may have Joe Smith who comes in and talks to you about, say, knee surgery, but his wife, who will be the one that's got to take care of him during and after the surgery, has to give buy-in. So once they go home and they're clear as mud about what they need to do and how much it's going to cost, how do you think the story is going to go when they explain it to Sally, their wife? Probably not very well, especially if they don't have any resources to share with Sally to explain exactly what's going to happen, how much time she's going to need to take off work, and how much care that the patient is actually going to need. And then the fifth and final phase of this is just fear and anxiety of medical practitioners as a whole. You never know what kind of trauma a patient has gone through previously before coming to you. And oftentimes that trauma can kick in at the moment when a decision is going to be made and remind them, hey, remember last time you did this, what happened? And if that isn't addressed or talked about with the patient and completely put to ease, the chances that they're going to move forward with their procedure is less and less. But if you're familiar with buying a car, as most people are, Typically, a salesperson doesn't want you to walk off the lot without buying the car. There's a reason for that. If you walk off the lot, the likelihood that you're going to come back and purchase that car drops significantly. But let's face it, in medical school and in most of the medical world, you're not taught much about sales and marketing, which isn't your fault. Let's be real. You went to school to heal people. You didn't go to school to run a business, which is why you've got to have the right people and the right assets in your repertoire in order to run your business effectively, profitably, and overcome some of the challenges that we talk about every week on the show. Unfortunately, because you don't have the sales and marketing tools and you don't often have the staff or team that can take care of those pieces for you, when the patients walk out the door, they're likely gone for good. And that isn't because you should hard sell them into getting surgery or treatment. It's because we aren't addressing the factors that are helping them make that decision in an effective way that makes them want to move forward on their own. Or if you are following up and trying to get them to schedule, it comes across like a used sales card person. And that is really not the reputation that you want your practice to have. And if you missed last week's episode when we were talking about scheduling, there are certain places where patients disengage. Well, this could be very well the same patient, or it could be a patient along the same pathway where they have chosen to disengage from the conversation and moving forward with your practice without you even knowing. And they may say, yeah, I'm going to book up front, and then walk out the door and never book. Or they could say, I'm going to call you later, and then you never hear from them again. And when you try to reach out, they don't answer. And so you could be leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table with these ghosted appointments and not even know why it's happening. As a privately owned practice versus a practice owned by a corporation, you have full control over how these conversations happen and can put in protocols to make sure that the patients are feeling more human and treated with better care, even if they don't book the appointment that day. Now, oftentimes you can have an office that has fantastic physicians and fantastic staff and team around the physicians, but where things fall apart is outside of the exam room. And that is part of the challenge when you're trying to get people to book an appointment outside of the exam room, maybe 24, 48 hours, or even longer, is if you don't have a team that can relay the way that you treat your patients in the same manner, that's where things are falling apart. If you don't have a plan in place to address all of the things that I just spoke about that are the challenges, it's pretty likely that you're leaking revenue. And to determine how much revenue you're leaking, we should probably do what I lovingly refer to as practice math. So let's take, for example, that you have 5 patients in a month that just don't schedule. You lose them somewhere along the way. And each of those patients is over time worth at least $6,000. Now, mind you, your numbers may be different if you're doing this math, but you can plug in your own numbers at any time. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to do so in this week's action plan. So stick with me. But those 5 patients times $6,000 is $30,000 a month. And if you multiply that by a year, that's $360,000 a year. And that's just for one physician. The likelihood, if you have more than one physician, of it being 5 patients per physician or more grows exponentially, which means that final number also grows exponentially. And this is revenue that was just sitting there waiting for you to push into the next step of your process. But somewhere along the way, you lost the patient. But don't worry, because there is always a chance to gain that patient back and actually make them even happier than when you spoke with them the first time. So let's talk about where you're really losing those patients. And it can happen in about, well, at least 5 different places, possibly more. The first is that you only give them a verbal synopsis of their treatment plan. You never write it out or don't share it with them in a way, shape, or form that they're going to remember. And oftentimes, if you go and talk someone through the treatment plan, they're only going to hear part of what you said, and they're definitely only going to remember at less than half of what you told them. And so if you're only delivering that treatment plan verbally, the chances they're going to be able to make an educated decision about it later without their memory getting involved in the things that they only kind of remember and don't necessarily have clarity on becomes less and less. The second place you can lose people is if you're sending them a treatment plan via PDF into their inbox. If they don't know that treatment plan is coming, or a number of things can go wrong here. One, it can just sit in their inbox and they stare at it because they don't really want to make the decision anyway, and they just ignore it and it gets lost in the fold of emails. Or worse, that email goes directly to spam, junk, or the trash can because their email filtered it into a place that said this isn't real mail, it's junk. So they never even get it. Regardless, sending that via email without a backup plan is another place you can lose these patients. The third place that I see practices lose patients along the way is they have this call us when you're ready mentality when it comes to booking the next action step of the treatment plan. And if you're waiting for a patient to call, if they're not already anxious to have this process completed or move forward with the procedure, the chances that they're going to call you back are slim to none because they don't want to be there. They will just hope that it clears up on their own. And there is no way in HE double hockey sticks that they are going to call you back and book an appointment without some prompting. Now, mind you, this isn't every patient. I'm not saying it's every patient, but I'm saying you are losing patients along the way because when you say, hey, let us know when you want to book, they're not going to let you know. They're going to go ask 25 other people what they should do. And by the time they actually make a decision, you might not even be in the running anymore. Now, the other place where things can go wrong, and I've seen this happen depending on the practice, and this may or may not apply to you, so take it with a grain of salt, is when practices offer a discount or some kind of promotion for their services. And this is wrong in so many ways. Number one is most people do not expect to get a discount on healthcare. And when you lower your price, they have to wonder, like, why are they lowering their price? And that becomes not a financial issue, but a trust issue. And frankly, nobody wants the cheapest healthcare when you only have one body. You want to make sure you're getting the best care. And when you cheapen yourself by offering a discount or some kind of promotion, people are going to wonder why you're doing that. And so I highly discourage practices from offering any kind of promotion or discount on their services. Now, if you're going to offer financing, that's completely different. That's a different conversation. And that is definitely something that should be offered if there are patients who cannot manage the payments for their procedure. And then last but not least, the place where we lose patients is the salesy follow-up call. And that is the front receptionist who calls a patient 2 days later and says, hey, are you ready to book? And they either get a voicemail, nobody answers, or when they get somebody on the phone, that person's like, no, I'll call you when I'm ready. And that's because this is a very outdated sales tactic that no longer works. Most of the time, those receptionists are working off of a script. They don't know these people from Adam, and it comes across glaringly. So if you're going to have follow-up calls, you need to treat each patient as though you know them, you're fully briefed on who they are, what's going on with them, and treating them like a human-to-human connection. Most front office staff doesn't have the capability or the time to be able to do that with these patient calls. In fact, more often than not, these patient follow-up calls have been delegated to them because they're the only ones that have the time to do it, which is a true indication of how your patient experience really is operating as a whole. So you may be wondering, well, we're doing some of those things, and what should we do instead? Well, I'm not going to leave you hanging. There are a few things that you can do instead that will not only help you stand out from your competitors, but there are things that you specifically can do because you aren't owned by a corporation who is going to dictate what you can and cannot do. Typically, a patient is going to make a decision within 48 hours of their appointment. And that is true for pretty much any kind of major decision. If they hem and haw longer than that, then they either weren't ready to make the decision in the first place, or they're going a different direction. Think about the last time that you bought a car. for example. If you went and looked at the lot and you drove, 4 or 5 different cars and then you walked away, you really weren't ready to make a decision that day. But if you walked onto the lot and you said, I want this exact car and I want it in this color and I'm going to drive it to see if I like it, you're pretty specific about what you want and you're more than likely going to buy it that day. Unless something goes drastically wrong with the sales process, you're probably going to walk out with that brand new car. But when it comes to medical decisions, the patients are usually sitting with their significant other or their family, and they're going through exactly what you told them, what they can remember, and they're likely trying to make the best decision they can with the information that they can recall and that they have in front of them. The work when it comes to patient experience isn't around trying to chase them and make them book an appointment. Rather, it's giving them the clarity, the knowledge, and the ability to recall what you've told them so that they are empowered to make the right decision for them. And what that does in turn for you is build trust with you and your organization that they know they're in good hands. Because if you've taken the time to empower the patient beforehand, they will only have high expectations of what it will be like to work with you and work through the challenges that they're going to have post-surgery or with a longer term treatment. So the first thing you can do is send a recap in plain language. Try to avoid using medical terms as much as possible. Try to speak human to human. This is where I tell people to write at a 4th to 7th grade level. And that isn't because your patients are uneducated, but it's because oftentimes when we're really good at something, like medicine, for example, we tend to speak in those terms because that is who we're surrounded with all the time. But 4th and 7th graders don't talk the way you're going to talk as an educated physician. And so if you're talking to your patients with those terms, they are going to get lost immediately. And when they're looking over a treatment plan and all they see are words that they have to put into Google to find out what they mean, it's too much effort, it's too much work, and they're just not going to move forward. So make that recap simple, easy to understand, and empowers them to make a decision that's the best for them and their lifestyle. If you can include in that recap everything possible about finances to also alleviate that fear, it will go even further. Don't leave them with questions of how much is my deductible going to cover? How much is it? What am I going to do if I can't pay beyond the deductible? How am I going to pay the deductible? They may have questions that they've never asked, but if you can be proactive in answering those questions because they come up all the time in that wrap up, the chances that you're going to put their mind at ease so that they make a decision quicker is much, much higher. The second thing you can do is give them something that they can hand to their spouse or significant other. And the reason is that likely this is going to be a joint decision, whether you're in on that conversation or not. And to include the spouse or significant other immediately says something not only to the patient, but also to their family, that they matter just as much as that patient does. And you want to ensure that they're included in this decision and include all of the information that you are sharing with the patient that you can. You want to give them the resources that they'll need, including, how long you would expect the patient to be needing extra care or needing a ride to the hospital. And then if they don't have those resources, or, if the patient doesn't have somebody that they need to work with, maybe you offer those same resources to the patient because they may be putting off having the surgery or the treatment because they don't have a way to get to your office or get to the hospital to have the surgery. And so that piece of paper not only welcomes that spouse or significant other, but it also alleviates a lot of strain between the patient and your office and their family. And then the third thing that you can do is instead of making that 48-hour follow-up call seem like a sales call, like, are you ready to book yet? Because if you were called to book a surgery and that's the phone call you got, what's the likelihood you're going to jump on board and say, yep, I'm ready? Probably not, especially if you're on the fence already. So instead, make it a very authentic phone call that just asks one question. Do you have any questions about what you and Dr. Smith went over last week? And if there's a question that the person making the phone call can't answer, then they take a note of that question, go and get the answer, and then get back to the patient. Because it could be just that one simple question that's keeping them from moving forward. Those are 3 quick things that you can do as a practice that don't make you feel more salesy. They don't make you feel pushy, but instead they're providing patient experience that most other practices aren't going to offer, which also makes you stand out from your competitors in a very authentic and easy way. So if you tune into these episodes every week, which if you do, thank you, I'm grateful, you know that I always try to give you an action plan to move forward. This week is no different, so let's dive into this week's action plan. Number 1, pull the data. I am a big proponent of pulling your data so you know where you're sitting with different components of your business. I've identified 9 different places that practices leak revenue, and most practices aren't even aware of more than 1 or 2, which means your practice could be a lot more profitable and have a lot more growth without investing in more stuff. But you're never going to know if that's the case if you aren't very familiar with your data. Pull your data for the last 60 days for consults. See how many of those consults moved forward and how many of those people didn't. And take that number and multiply it by your average patient revenue. And that's going to give you a very good idea of what you're losing over a couple of months. You can take that number and multiply it by 6, and then you'll really have an oh shiitake moment, because most often that revenue is quite a bit more than practices are ready to be confronted with. So that's step number 1. Calculate your consultation loss for the last 60 days and then average it over a year. The second thing you can do is audit your own practice. Act like you had a consult, or have somebody come in and get a consult that you pay to do so. And what do they leave your office with? If the answer is nothing, then you know we have some work to do. And if the answer is we're going to email them later, again, you probably have some work to do. Because if you're losing consults and that is what they're leaving with, then you know where the hiccup in the process is. And then your last piece of the action plan, which can be a little bit scary, but will be so revealing about what is going on in your practice. And that is to call a consult that didn't move forward and just ask them one question. What kept you from moving forward? And then document or write down everything that they say, because that in itself is gold and will tell you so much about your practice and where things are falling through the cracks that you can then create an entire process and plan around that information. Chances are pretty high that you don't need more sales tactics for your medical practice. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend sales tactics for a medical practice. What you need instead is a practical and process-driven way to take a patient who is overwhelmed and doesn't know how to make a decision to going through the process very simply and easily and making a very valid decision for their health and their well-being in less than 48 hours. That warm follow-up process is exactly one of the processes we're going to be building in my founding members program. The program is limited to 10 participants and will follow and be based on principles and processes followed in the hospitality industry and how we can apply those to improve patient experience across your practice. If your practice is leaking revenue and you just aren't sure where that biggest leak is, I've created a special 20-minute call for you and I to sit down and determine what that is together so that you can take steps and get traction this year, not next year, not next quarter, but right now on optimizing that process or optimizing that part of your practice so that you can plug those revenue leaks. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this episode. I appreciate you tuning in. If you found value in today's show, I would love for you to share it with someone else. In the meantime, I'll see you next week. Take care, be well, stay safe. See you soon.